All right, Elliot. Welcome,
I'm
everyone.
in.
Elliot, how's it going?
Another day in paradise, my friend.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Vladimir Bosanac. I am one of the co hosts here of the Spatial Show, and by day, also the co founder and publisher of the Registry, a West Coast commercial real estate news organization.
And I am your other co host, Elliot Golan. And during the day, I am a senior vice president and one of the leaders of the dedicated real estate practice at Allison, a global marketing communications firm.
Elliot, on today's show, we're going to have an interesting conversation. We're going to have a panel conversation, which actually we recorded back in January 28th. This is a panel that was based in San Francisco, and the focus of it was San Francisco and the broader Bay Area commercial market. But we thought it was interesting
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of companies based in the AI space are obviously popping up in San Francisco. So from kind of like an economic development and jobs and even investment point of view, we thought this was a good sort of primer on the industry. So the panel actually is comprised of five executives from the commercial real estate industry. We've got Stephanie Kwong Ting from Swig, Chris Quiett from Manova Partners, Cyrus Sanandaji from Presidio Bay Partners, Greg Smitties from Fifth Wall Investments, a venture capital firm, and then Jim Walker from Kidder Matthews. So this panel is coming up right after our conversation. But before we get into that, I do want to run through a little bit of the headlines that we're going to talk about today. So first, we're going to kick it off with a Blackstone investment in New York with the Spiral Building at 66 Hudson Boulevard, part of the Hudson Yards neighborhood area. I don't know what you call it, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
then we'll talk about the Redfin acquisition a bit, and then we're going to close it off with what does sort of the current administration and sort of the winds of change, if you will. What does it mean for green and resilient retrofit programs across the industry? Elliot.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm really excited to get into that. I think the sustainability conversation is going to pick back up again, but I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here. So we'll start with Blackstone. Obviously, one of the most important companies in our industry, if not the. And something has taken place that I think is very interesting and talks a lot about kind of the mentality of our industry. So I want to kind of balance these several things. So on one hand, Blackstone, and this has been talked about for a while. I don't think this is going to be breaking news to a lot of people, but they're close to having a large stake in this property. The thing that I find more interesting here is that John Gray, always the optimist, as everyone in our industry is paid to be, said that this shows and he sees the office sector as ripe. And
Ripe for
I'm just
what?
sort of,
Ripe for picking, ripe for acquisitions.
yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's trying to sell optimism, but like an N of one is not indicative of an entire
Right.
market's sort of identity. So just some crosswinds here. The Blackstone worked through about $1 billion in bad loans in Q4, mostly office. The mortgage trust REIT currently has about $1 billion of bad loans, a lot of which are office. There was news about a month ago that the firm is being sued for foreclosure for its River North office in Chicago. Meanwhile, the office sector's ripe? No, this is just the same thing it's always been. If you buy good assets in good areas with strong demand, I don't care what inning we're in, I don't care what asset class it is, there are such a thing as just good investments. And that's what anything at Hudson Yards is.
I agree, and I'm curious what the occupancy of this property might be, because one of the things that we've heard, and we'll hear about this also during the panel discussion later in the show. There is has been sort of flight to quality phenomenon, which has marked most of kind of the last maybe 24 months or so, maybe even
Yeah.
since the start of COVID, if you will. And you're absolutely right. Based on sort of anecdotally what we're seeing and hearing, and on some of the industry reporting as well, this is exactly it. Good properties seem to be able to get good tenants. They seem to be filling up, and in some cases even going for record per square foot leases. So that is not surprising, and I wonder, you were going to, I think, mention how this might be sort of Blackstone's way of kind of maybe moving the market a little bit, getting people to get a little more comfortable to dance in this dance, right? Is that what's going on here?
It could be. I mean, it's an SEC thing. Now, obviously, it doesn't apply here because we're not talking about an open-ended fundraise. But I mean, this does seem something akin to, and I say with capital letters, conditioning the market. And we've seen this in the stock market in the good old days, where sort of if someone of note, I mean, we'll go back a long time here and say T. Boone Pickens or whatever, when he speaks, everyone listens, and the market therefore reacts. Whether it's right or wrong is sort of irrelevant at that point. And I'm wondering if that's kind of what this is here, because if Blackstone comes out and says you should do something with your capital, at some level, who the heck are we to disagree? They're doing just fine.
Or it could be sort of a brilliant move where they're kind of doing something. Everybody was like, "What are they talking about? What should we be doing this? What are they doing that we don't know that they're doing?" Right? And Blackstone is certainly somebody that people will follow and try to figure out where and why they're kind of doing things. But it is interesting. I think we have heard anecdotally that return to office is real. Activities around certain central business districts, except maybe in San Francisco, seem to be doing relatively well. Occupancy of sort of some of the office spaces is going back up. I know I've seen some numbers, some kind of average numbers. We're still around the kind of 55-60% number. But I bet in certain properties it's a lot higher. And I wonder if 66 Hudson is one of those where it's closer to maybe 80, 90.
Yeah, I don't have the occupancy numbers, but I have to imagine they're decent. And frankly, even if they're not currently, there's always going to be safe bets or safer bets. I suppose it's still a bet. Nothing is inherently safe. I'm sure when they bought some of the properties that they've now lost in San Francisco, or they had a trophy asset in DC that they did with, I think it was Columbia Property Trust, that they gave back to the bank. I mean, those were considered safe bets at the time. So, that remains to be seen. But the fact of the matter is, and the most interesting part here is the idea that it is, again, indicative of the overall market. We're talking about Midtown Manhattan, guys. Demand for a Class A plus property in Midtown Manhattan is not indicative of the market. It's just not.
Right. Yeah.
I think there are these pools, right? There's these sort of breakouts all over the place, right? Inland Empire Industrial in Southern California, another good example. That's Field of Dreams. Build it and they will come.
Although I would argue maybe Midtown Manhattan is sort of the center of the spiral, right? And not in a negative way, but it sort of starts there, and then in concentric circles as you go wider and wider, it begins to activate other parts of the city. I think there are analogs like that in other markets, right, where you see kind of a lot of that being driven out of certain spaces, right? So Hudson Yards has been, I think, a very successful development. So clearly this might be one of these where this one's going to be probably one of the first ones to come back if it already hasn't.
Yeah.
Right? So
right. Yeah.
Good. Well, one of the discussion points I wanted to bring up, which news. This is not necessarily big news, but it is. I guess it was big news in the residential real estate market last week. Redfin announced that it was being acquired for $1.76 billion or something like that, I believe. The thing about residential real estate, we don't often sort of talk about it, but this caught my eye from a point of view, from like a kind of like a product development marketing point of view, if you will. Simply because Redfin was one of these companies that I would argue brought to the market what the market wanted, right? So we talked about We know that the Realtors Association was sued for price fixing, essentially, right? The sort of 6%, the coveted 6% transaction fee that sellers were effectively paying, right, for the work of both the buyer and seller agents.
Right.
They lost that lawsuit. It seems that a company could emerge if it said we're going to do half or we're going to do 1% is going to be a winner. Everyone's going to go there, and this is what Redfin did from kind of 2006 to 2010. It was playing around with sort of this 1% listing fee, but then it kind of moved more aggressively in that space. I hear that, or I sort of saw some of the reporting that at some point it did go back to some of the sort of traditional fee structure, as maybe it was kind of hurting a bit. It was a marketplace that I think allowed for a lot of research, a lot of sort of people that were kind of looking for places or were trying to sort of see how much their homes were worth. They would go to Redfin. It was one of the sort of two or three sources for that information. And then, I would say the reason they were bought last week is because they were failing. And even the CEO made some comment that, had they not sold, that they would have been picked up for pieces, right? What do you think about this? Here's a company that's literally bringing what the market wanted, and it didn't make it.
For me, it's a pretty dramatic changing of the guard. Over the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years, and I'm not going to mention Redfin specifically, but it's tangential very closely. Every single business has basically wanted to be the Uber of ... or the Zillow of ... That's like marketing 101 for everyone. And Redfin is, obviously a very close competitor, was a very close competitor of Zillow, and to a lot of people who maybe didn't understand all the ins and outs because they are different companies. But to your average consumer, they probably think of them as Uber and Lyft, like literally the same company with a different name. What this shows is that ultimately disruption, which is firms like Zillow, firms like Uber, firms like Redfin, that's what they got famous for. That's what they became successful for. Disruption isn't permanent. It's momentary by definition. And at this point, no one could call Redfin a disruptor because it has become sort of the norm. So once you lose that sort of disruptor status and you just become another company, man, it's very hard to stay alive with that business model.
Yeah. One of the other things about Redfin is that it was paying its agents a salary, right? So again, not pushy salespeople, right? You would think that they were incentivized to, assist instead of help rather than, transact. I'm sure they were getting paid, obviously, bonuses on, transactions too, but probably not the kind of their main focus. And the one distinction between Zillow and Redfin is that I don't think Zillow has any agents. I think Zillow is more like a lead generation platform. Redfin has its own had its own agent force, right? What's interesting is that they were able to kind of push for this sort of very lower fee, but people still weren't going for it, which I kind of find very interesting. Like, they were probably seen as maybe the second tier, third tier kind of, player, right? And then Compass kind of comes out of nowhere. The customer-facing portion of Compass is not necessarily that different, but what they did is they raised a bunch of money. They started giving it to agents just to join their platform, in effect, kind of stealing the best of the best and then using that as a way to kind of dominate the market, right? We have some people that we've talked to who think, the Compass model is not sustainable, but they're still around for all intents and purposes. And, Redfin, whose model you would argue was maybe interesting and kind of more aligned with what the market really wanted, didn't survive. So it is a curious kind of case of why this happened, and I'll try to dig in some more to see if there's any more detail about it. Maybe now with the CEO of Redfin will come join us, or the former CEO of
Right.
Redfin will join us to come talk
Former
to us
CEO, what's
to
next?
see what's
Well,
what drove that decision. But that was an interesting kind of perspective. That sort of caught my eye on that.
well, I wonder if they tried to do too much with the agent thing. Because if you ask, I'll use my wife, and of course she's just an N of one. But if you ask her what the difference between Zillow and Redfin is, she's going to say one is using a lot of blue and the other is using a lot of red in their color schemes. So yes, they're very different, as you discussed, the fact that Redfin is a brokerage as well. But I think a lot of John and Jane Q Public just saw them both as sort of like, hey, I drove by this, house on my street. It's got a for sale sign. Let me jump on Zillow or Redfin, enter the address, see if I can see some pictures and be nosy.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what the average person uses these platforms for. And by the way, I fall into that cohort. The house next to me, there's a sign out front. You know what I did? I went to Zillow and I put in the address. So I'm no different than any of y'all, right? I mean, this is just what you do. Um, and I wonder if they tried to do a little bit too much. And what you were talking about, that's the ultimate thing.
And the other
Real estate is a lot.
the other point that and I don't know how to quantify this, but the other point that maybe is why Compass is successful is at the end of the day, this is a relationship business, or maybe more so than we even would think it is a relationship business. You would think that it's sort of transactional. You can get an agent and you're like, okay, this agent can do the same job as the next agent, but maybe perceived that way, they cannot. Maybe this is why
Sure.
certain agents get the bulk of the business in a certain neighborhood, right? And the others just can't cut it. And I wonder if that was a big part of it as well, where they were going after people that were not super aggressive, that were not kind of these sort of wheeler dealer kind of folks. And at the end of the day, maybe the wheeler dealer kind of folks are the ones who are more successful in the residential real estate industry. I would be curious to talk to somebody who can maybe provide some more insights, but interesting perspective.
Yeah, I mean, listen, of course, coaches and brands and all these things have value, but the worst kept secret in all of real estate is that it's simply the players on the team. And, I'll use commercials since that's both of our sort of primary focus. But the difference between CB, JLL, Cushman, Colliers, Kidder, Newmark is basically nothing.
Yeah.
They're all the same shop, so it's really about the people, it's the relationships, it's the individual brokers. So if Compass has the LeBron Jameses of the world and Redfin lost them, Compass wins the championship. It's that simple.
Yep. No, I think that certainly seems to be the big driver.
So our last topic is going to get, I don't want to say spicy, but a little bit out there. So I want to use this one bit of news to talk about something that has been sort of on my mind. So it was announced last week that HUD is cutting its $1 billion green and resilient retrofit program, which is sort of focused on retrofitting in a more energy efficient and sustainable way, specifically affordable housing units. But stepping outside of the sphere of affordable housing and focusing exclusively on the sustainability part, the question I have is this the next thing that we're going to see deprioritized? So, the first example after the administration came into office was obviously DEI, and it made tons of headlines, sort of the deprioritizing of DEI initiatives, and some firms shut their programs down, other firms smartly marketed came out and said, no, we're doubling down. That affects real estate, but not quite as much as the sustainability topic. And I'm wondering, are we, the real estate community, going to have our moment of who's actually going to continue to prioritize this when perhaps on a national level, it's not quite as big of a priority?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on this are that yes and no. Yes, I think there is going to be a swing in this direction for sure. We're going to see, a probably very kind of deep reanalysis of ESG and all these kind of resilience and green sort of programs. and that may be kind of something that we see play itself out over the next 24 or 48 months. I am also convinced, as a father of two Gen Alpha kids, there is no way in hell that they are going to operate or live or work in environments that maybe we did in the 90s and 2000s.
Right.
What was normal for us will not be normal for them. This new generation will 100% drive this change. And I don't think that a single administration is going to change that. I think they may try to influence it a little bit for their own interest and their purposes of maybe getting reelected or repositioned or raising money or whatever. Right. But I do think that these things go in waves and they sort of swing one way or another, and maybe we're going to swing in a certain direction. But I think it's going to revert back to the mean and swing back the other way also. What would you think? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the market will dictate everything, right? And when we look at landlords on a national level, let's use office because it's our favorite asset class to talk about here. A lot of these multi-market tenants that your large landlords are looking to attract, and we'll just use tech firms because they're a perfect example. It doesn't matter what you're saying or what you're reporting. Their real estate teams will come out and ask you, show me the money, show me your sustainability efforts as a requirement to consider leasing. So ultimately, the free market sort of decides these things. My contention is more around the performative aspects of sustainability and greenwashing, and now AI washing is the new hot term in the streets. But a lot of these ESG reports are, I don't want to assign a percentage, but some percentage of legitimate reporting on efforts. But let's all be honest and let's be adults in the room. A certain percentage of that is marketing. It's performative.
I would say a big percent. I would say a big percentage of it probably is. I think there is probably only a handful, maybe not a handful. That's exaggerating. I would say a small number of companies that truly believe this, and I would say, here in our area, it's definitely Google. I mean, Google's been known for over a decade now, really pushing this agenda. You can't be a vendor of Google's if you don't disclose like all the materials and chemicals and everything that goes into the making of your products. They just sort of demand it, but no one else comes close. So they stand out. Right. They definitely believe it. Others are kind of probably trying to be Google adjacent or act like them, but are not, right? And I think you're absolutely right. You are going to see a good amount of sort of greenwashing or whatever you want to call it. Now, anti-greenwashing or whatever you want to call it, right? And I think it's going to swing in either direction. You're absolutely right. The market is going to drive this because at the end of the day, these companies are going to do what makes the most sense. If they can't find employees and all of a sudden they figure out that those employees are driven by X or Y, guess what? They're going to be the number one X or Y company. If they can't, find, office space, they can't hire people, they can't go after a certain market segment because they're behaving a certain way or not behaving a certain way, they're going to change that. 100% they're going to change that. And I think, the folks out there who do believe in these things should be vocal about it too, because I think they will be able to make an impact on how some of these companies behave.
There's two other things that I kind of want to dive into here, and I'd like to get a little bit asset class specific because I have an anecdote, and I can't name the company for myriad reasons that I'm sure our audience will very quickly understand.
Just whisper it, Elliot. No one's going to hear it.
It doesn't rhyme with Blackstone. So they have put out ESG reports historically the last few years, as pretty much every national player has. And this is a national player, well over $10 billion in assets under management. This isn't, John's developing firm. They're not going to do it this year. And frankly, it's because, and I love corporate cliches, typically making fun of them, but ultimately because the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And I take it farther. Office sector is one thing, and we love talking about them. Something I want to get your take on is what about the housing and multifamily sector, where frankly, every company from Graystar on down the NMHC list, they think their brand is very, very important, and it has some value. But we all know people rent apartments based on a number of factors, and the brand of the property management firm is not very high on that list. Location, price, does the property look nice? I couldn't tell you all the property management firms of apartments I lived in, and I work in the industry. I have no idea. It doesn't matter. So those firms, with consumers ultimately as their customer that don't have maybe sustainability standards, do multifamily firms back off of this because their tenants aren't asking? They never were.
I think it depends what your vacancy is. And so if you're approaching 97%, you don't need to do anything. Your product is doing fine. If you're having a difficult
Right.
time, filling spots. We've tackled this problem a little bit over the years and asked that question. How relevant are things like all these green initiatives and sustainability in finding a place, and this is all anecdotal. I don't remember. I know there were some studies done around this, but it's not that important. I think it comes down to maybe, like, I don't know, 20% of the decision. I would argue to a certain demographic, maybe once you hit a certain
Sure.
kind of income level, it could be more important, where they have choices because they have money. They can sort of pick one, two, or three, and they're going to pick one that's, I don't know, more greener or more healthier or whatever.
Sure.
For those who are sort of struggling and are trying to sort of find something within a budget, unfortunately, I think they're going to, have to compromise and probably do. And so I think those are kind of the things on the multifamily side. Now, having said that, I would argue that COVID has really brought a lot of attention to things like air filtration, the cleanliness of
Right.
of the space, how healthy is it? And I think people are more aware of things like that, just in general, simply because we've sort of gone through it. It's not going to be the last pandemic that we have.
Of course not.
There are others that are sort of in the news, that we don't know if it could, pop at any sort of moment in time. So I think generally people are looking for things that maybe are not 100% there, but at least offer some kind of, hey, at least they're aware of it, right? They're trying to create a space that
Right.
resonates
Right.
with me a little bit, right?
Yeah, and with those consumer-facing parts of our industry, multifamily obviously being the largest, but we could even use retail as an
Yeah.
example as well. Um, I think we may see a bifurcation along the lines of what you're talking about. So things like ventilation, aspects of ESG that speak directly to human health on a short-term basis, because obviously climate change is fundamental to human health,
Right.
but it's on a longer-term basis, sort of the instant gratification story here. So these firms will continue to prioritize those things, like you're talking about vis-a-vis COVID and filtration systems and all of that. But will they prioritize solar energy versus, oil and gas, or some of these more, let's call it, systemic and existential effects on human health that, I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, but folks like you and I, we won't suffer from that much. It's our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren. So, yes, we see things come up. We see increased hurricanes. We just saw the big fire in LA, and a lot of people
Yeah.
will attribute that to climate change, and that's totally reasonable. But the biggest impacts of climate change are to come, and to come long after you and I are gone.
Or not. No,
Bro.
I think that's a good point. I do see some of that having an impact in a sense that at least in the Western markets where you and I are, Elliot, I think it becomes table stakes. I think
Yeah.
LEED maybe 20 years ago was so innovative. I remember when we kicked off the registry, we were at that point still a monthly magazine. Our first issue was the green issue, and we wrote about all these LEED efforts. And LEED efforts, I'm not joking, were focused on the three bins in the office. So there's a recycling bin, there's a trash bin, and and I'm not kidding. Like that was the extent of
Right.
it. And if you were
That was the extent.
if you were a company that had a lead program, you were considered cutting edge, meaning that you had a recycling bin for your papers, right? This is back when people used a lot of paper, only 20 years ago.
Right.
I think lead today, like lead gold and platinum, is almost table
It's
stakes,
nothing.
right? You're now seeing, you're seeing energy savings. You're even seeing I'm going to butcher this, but the system from Seattle, the international, with the one that uses the pedals.
Oh yeah.
You know which one I'm talking about, but that's like
The-
really like zero, like net zero kind of stuff. And so I think what we're going to see with developments of multifamilies, multifamily projects will be things like solar panels will be automatically included, because why not? Electrical, appliances will be just a standard kind of thing, and so there will be a change of like that happening. Less so because of the market, more so because I think in society it'll be just like, wow, who uses gas anymore? I think it'll be just a new
Sure.
thing, right?
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of this conversation obviously focuses on municipalities as well. So both of us, me, a lifelong West Coaster, and a large chunk of your life on the West Coast. You're living in the Bay Area, previously in Seattle. I live in Seattle, previously in LA. The ordinances and requirements at the local level always far exceeded the national requirements.
Yeah.
But let's say the Midwest, where they sort of were following the leader and doing maybe just what they have to. If that have to goes down, does their effort follow? I don't know,
Yeah,
but I think
I don't
there's
either.
a very good chance.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do feel that we've typically seen sort of trends kind of start usually West Coast and then move eastward, and
Right.
that happens with office. It happens with sort of all kinds of different things. I do feel that as some of these companies expand into those other markets, they will bring what's normal to them locally here.
Sure.
On the West Coast to other municipalities, and I think certainly you're going to start seeing places like the Midwest, and we already talked about Columbus being the third largest data center market in
Right,
this country.
right.
So if you already have issues with energy creation, they're going to think about alternate ways, whether it's nuclear, whether it's solar, wind, right? And I think that's going to spill over to other segments of the industry too. It just has to, because it's going to be table stakes. It's just going to be the way that you do business these days.
The lead thing is such a good example. I remember talking to a developer. This is probably over a year ago now, and they thought it was a very, very big deal that their office building was LEED certified, and I sort of had to be the bearer of bad news, which was, wait, so you have an office building in LA and it's LEED certified? Find me the one that isn't.
Yes.
Right. Find
Exactly.
me the attractive office building that isn't. That's done, man.
Yeah.
Like, that's like central air in an Arizona home. Like, you have to have it.
Right.
But yeah, I think sustainability is, and we can continue following this. And frankly, I don't think we're going to have a choice.
Right,
But
right.
I think that's going to be a very big topic for us, specifically as we see the flavor of sort of the national priorities shift, and it becomes more incumbent upon the markets rather than pure optics to dictate the actuality of it.
Yeah, and I think my point is that you're going to see, whether it's next administration or whenever, there will be a swing in the opposite direction, simply because whether it's the constituency, the political constituency, or the economic one are going to dictate it, and I don't see a way around that. So we're not going to go back to coal and gas. We might for a little bit, but only until we,
Right.
deplete those resources. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a blip.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting blip, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, the world, and you and I have talked about it before, and we can probably wrap up here because I think you and I could talk about this for hours and hours. Administrations are blips on the overall trajectory of society. Things are going a certain way, and of course, administrations have an impact, but they can't turn, you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. You can't completely turn the ship around. Maybe you can slow it down.
And
maybe you can have it turn slightly left.
And they're often behind where the society already is. Right? Sure. They're sort of they're very retroactive in that sense, meaning that something will happen in our society and they will kind of catch on and sort of use it, right?
Of course.
They're very, very seldom do they actually are the tip of the spear, where they're sort of moving things in a certain direction. And like I said, just judging from my two kids, who are not that extraordinary, I think in this area, this is just going to be a non-issue, I think, in 5 years, 10 years, when that generation is full on engaged in the work and living environment, if you will. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting.
It's just an expectation.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So, Elliot, here we are at the end of our conversation. So we are going to turn it over to our panel conversation here that, again, happened in just at the end of January here in San Francisco. The speakers are, again, Stephanie Kwong Ting from Swig, Chris Quiett from Manova Partners, Cyrus and Johnny from Presidio Bay Partners, Greg Smitty's from Fifth Wall, and Jim Walker from Kidder Matthews. I hope you enjoyed their conversation and get a few nuggets of where things are heading. Elliot, great to see you again. We'll see you again soon.
Always a pleasure. Take care, brother.
Well, welcome everybody. I hope you can. Everyone has a microphone. I will run down and introduce everybody. First, I'm glad we're all sitting in this order. It happened that my introductions are in this order too. Stephanie Ting from the Swig company leads Swig's investment and capital markets transaction activity. She joined Swig in November of 2021. Now, the Swig company was formed well before when Stephanie was born. It's a 93-year-old company. So she's one of the new employees, and she has great experience coming from Morgan Stanley, where she led a lot of their real estate investing group on the mezz level, mostly, I understand. Stephanie graduated magna cum laude from Harvard College with a degree in economics and holds an MBA from Harvard Business School as well. Chris Quiett, the head of USA from Manova Partners, despite his youthful appearance, Chris has over 30 years of commercial real estate experience in asset management, transactions and property management. He has previously held senior leadership roles in Macquarie's asset management and the Fremont Group, and many of you may know that Manova just became an independent platform from Macquarie in December of last year. And so you'll see a big difference between the Swig company and how it manages capital and Macquarie, obviously, I mean Manova, and how it handles capital as well. Chris has a bachelor's degree, a bachelor's of science in business administration with a focus on finance from California State University, Sacramento. And I thought, and I suppose one fact we should put out is Manova manages an assets under management of over 12 billion euro. It's a pleasure to see Cyrus. I've been looking for him and hoping to meet him, so thanks for coming. Cyrus is the managing principal and the founder of Presidio Bay Ventures. He founded the company in 2012 and is actively involved in all aspects of the company's operations and strategic planning. Presidio Bay has a projected $5.6 billion asset value portfolio spanning 5.3 million square feet in about 40 assets. Interesting, Cyrus grew up in Dubai and holds a master's degree from St. Anthony's College at University of Oxford, a bachelor's degree in international relations from University of California, San Diego. And as we'll note, Presidio Bay Partners purchased a distressed property in 2023 at 60 Spear and announced in 2024 that it was really investing capital for rehabilitation in that building, a significant amount. And I failed to mention that the Swig company was one of the first people to jump into the distressed market as well in 2023, buying 350 California. Where's Greg? There he is. Greg co-leads the climate technology investment team at Fifth Wall. You may not have heard of Fifth Wall, but it's someone you should get to know. Fifth Wall is one of the largest asset managers investing at the intersection of real estate and technology, basically prop tech. The company's portfolio is made up of more than 150 category-leading startups. And prior to joining Fifth Wall, Greg was a partner at BMWI Ventures, where he led the sustainability investing practice. Again, an interesting background. He was born in Pretoria, South Africa. He graduated from University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, where he received a BS in economics and in computer science. And my friend, who I did not recognize earlier today, because he still has his graduating high school photo on the website, Jim Walker.
COVID's been tough on me.
That's just so I really didn't recognize him. But Jim is crucial to this panel. He is the senior vice president at Kidder Matthews and does both landlord and tenant representation, has done several hundred transactions, and Jim's focus on the landlord side is on historical low-rise multi-tenanted office buildings in San Francisco Central Business District. So the gentleman who asked the question about the Class Bs, and I know Jim's going to have a view about AI leasing in San Francisco too, which I'm going to make sure to suss out. Jim is a graduate of San Diego University. I am honored to be the moderator of this panel, and what I'd like to do is build on the thesis I think we heard from, he calls himself Quinn, it's Alex Quinn, but from what the thesis that I think we heard, and I'd like you all to comment on it. And that is that their interest rates will remain high. There will be inflation, there will be fewer rate cuts, and there's a continued risk of higher unemployment, and raw material costs in construction trades. I think we're seeing that really as well. As such, buying any distressed property today is a long-term hold, and I think Quinn mentioned that. I don't think we can operate on the thesis that if we buy now, we're going to have a cap rate exit at a lower number. It's just not going to be there. So it's a longer-term hold, and I think we're going to see how some of these investors or managers of money have to deal with that. So as I said, JL is tracking about 25 distressed office properties in the market. Some people have jumped in, as I said, notably Presidio Bay and Swig. I think Chris will say something about about Manova. And as I mentioned, there was the article in today's paper about the Pruneyard Tower selling at such a steep discount at a cap rate at about 14%. Just an odd fact. So, Stephanie, let me start with you. How are you dealing? What do you take away from Quinn's thesis, and how does that lead to what the Swig company is doing?
Yeah, thank you, Manny. I don't disagree with a lot of what Manny and Alex just shared. I believe in the economic thesis of higher for longer. Maybe the one point I think is interesting is we've seen the level of debt maturities being really high, sky high in 2024, including a good portion of office and multifamily. You're seeing some distress, but probably not the level that you would expect given that. And I think we're seeing it on our own portfolio where we're refining loans. And I think a lot of times lenders are working with you as the borrower to try to extend I think people say extend and pretend for a couple years and hope the situation improves. But the lender does not want to take back the property. And so I think there will be some more distress, but I would question whether we'll see massive amounts of wave of distress and potentially reduced pricing in 2025. I think we've passed the bottom in San Francisco. That's my hope anyway.
Interesting. Chris?
Yeah, I do agree with everything you said. And we are a buyer right now. We are in the market. We have a deal right now in the Bay Area where we should go under contract this week. So we're optimistic. We think we've reached the bottom. We're not underwriting things expecting rate cuts. In fact, I remember going back to the 1990s, and I was thinking about this en route here today, and I wish I would have kept these things. I threw away, I save everything, but I threw a bunch of business plans away that were for 50 Fremont, 333 Market, 123 Mission, and I forget the other. These were all buildings that we had partnerships with Shorenstein and MetLife. I worked with the Fremont Group, part of Bechtel at the time. And when we were underwriting deals back then, you always underwrote an exit of about 100 basis points higher. You didn't really count on cap rate compression. It's really something, it seems like in the last 20 years that,
Right.
That's, in fact, there's been a lot of deals out there where, I think we've bought assets and you probably didn't perform at the asset level. We know we have to have a very sharp pencil when we're acquiring things, but due to cap rate compression, we did pretty well. But so anyway, I'm a believer in the market. I agree. I don't think we're going to see in the global financial crisis. Banks took action very quickly, and I think they regretted that. They've learned from that experience, rolling that into today. And in fact, a colleague and I met with one of the large banks that has a lot of loans here, as well as in Los Angeles, and they were very clear. If they believe in the asset, they believe in the sponsor, they're gonna work with them. They're doing A/B notes, doing whatever they can. Maybe they can get some money on the back end. If they don't necessarily believe in the asset and or the operator, then you're going to see them take those buildings back. So, or you have situations where they're so far underwater that, quite frankly, the sponsor is not going to put capital into it, and that's going to go back to the bank. So,
Right. I think that's going to be really one of the takeaways, that if you don't have a source of capital and you're doing what Presidio Bay is doing, it's impossible because you don't have the capital to invest in the property. Your promote's gone.
yeah,
And so if you want to turn those keys over if you can, because it's just more of a losing game for you.
unless the bank's going to work with you and,
Right.
and write the loan down or whatever. And then, I would say one key difference in past cycles to this one is asset selection too. I think that's just going to be absolutely key because, it is going to be a long haul crawling out of, roughly 35% vacancy. And there's certainly assets that are going to perform coming out of it. I think 60 Spears is certainly one of those, but there's a lot that are going to be left behind.
I think there's just been such a deep level of value erosion that even if you had the capital, I think there's a lot of groups that are really well financed and have the liquidity, but need to look at the opportunity set and say, look, even if a lender took a little bit of a write down, their basis is just that high that even if they invested the extra $400 to $500 a foot to differentiate the asset, they're just never going to recover that. And so I think you're seeing groups, even the Blackstones and others, throwing back the keys in certain cases and then going into the market and buying distress, a couple months later. And I think there's just basic math at play there with legacy assets with high basis.
That's a great observation, right? Because you're giving up a bad asset because you can't throw the money in because it won't ever pencil out. So give it back, come in at a lower basis with a distressed property.
Well, I would even say, adding to your point, there's assets, even if you add the money, the tenants aren't going to be there because,
Right.
Employers have a certain criteria, whatever that is, what kind of building they want to put their employees in, and regardless of the money you put into it, it's not going to lease.
I think that goes right to the heart of the asset selection, comment as well, which is, you look at the mid-market numbers. I think $25 a foot is generous, candidly. Even if I don't think you can give it away.
Good luck getting a tour.
Honestly, that's not, and I wish there was something you could do with those buildings, but I think that becomes a systemic risk in a market like ours where even though it's not that big of a submarket, it's a pretty critical location in the city, right next to City Hall and along Market Street, that we do need to figure out what to do with these sort of functionally, obsolete buildings for the health of the overall sort of ecosystem and market. But there's no amount of money that's going to fix that locationally until there's a sort of seismic shift at the political level and at the street, safety level. So
I would say for the mid-market, I know the trades currently have been like roughly $100 per square foot. I think the thesis, and we've underwritten some of these to take a look, is you just hold it and just don't do anything and wait for some appreciation. Ideally, it's an owner-user who has the ability to take it if they want it. And the interesting thing about mid-market is just it's so dependent on really that block by block. And I think we all feel maybe better about the new administration with a mayor. And so I feel like there is some outlook for it and some business plan, but you have to be the right capital that can wait.
Jim, I know you're dying to talk about the leasing activity.
Yeah, well,
and so you really should, but there are some points here that you really have to respond to.
Yeah, so based on the mid-market, we represent 3 larger projects out there right now, and we just completed a lease at 944 Market, and it was at $24, not $25. We have a building at 1155 Market that we're bringing out, which is going through receivership, and we're dealing with an issue where the lender who's taking it back has a long-term approach. We just, the value on the note is X, and the value of it today is Y, and it's 3 times less. So they're taking a long-term approach. We're approaching it on a 2-track system, which is, first, what can we do on a quick and dirty paint and carpet deal, and then we've done all the renderings and stripped down a couple of floors and got the pricing out to do $175 a foot TIs, which is going to require a 10-year term. And, is there ultimately a tenant out there? We are more hopeful today than we were 7 or 8 months ago. There is some hope that down the road we're going to get some city help. And historically that's what mid-market's going to need. What got it started 12, 13, 14 years ago were tax credits, and we're going to need some incentive to boost that up again. But yeah, a market like that is very challenging. We, from a brokerage firm, we've been in the BOV business the last year. So as you mentioned a little earlier, there's not going to be a wave of buildings coming back, but there's going to be certain markets that are going to be harder hit. It'll be geographical, like mid-market. We're going to see some more coming back, and we're going to see it more weighted to historical B and C buildings as opposed to Class A's that are just generally going to handle the storm better. And I think Alexander hit it on the head. If you bought your building 2016 and post that
With debt.
it's
You're underwater.
Yeah, it's really painful.
Yeah. Before I turn it over to you, Greg, because Greg's got a value add story, and I really think that's something to really talk about. But I do think that what will change the market in mid-market is once we see the San Francisco Center change hands, because that can't happen without the city involvement and a big master plan. And you might have to hold a long time, but something's going to happen to that, and I hope to talk more about that. But I clearly agree with what you say in mid-market, and it leads to one of my theses and I think Alex touched on it, it's a tale of 2 cities at some level, because there is transactions moving in Class A space, and as Steph and I were talking, it takes $400 to $500 a square foot to build that out. See our second panel, but there's still transactions going on. So, Mr. Good News, I'll set it up for you. Clearly, what's going to make buildings differentiate and make them less functionally obsolete is prop tech, is energy and sustainability. So what does your company do?
We're here. We've got this solved. Don't worry. We've got it under control. No, I'll actually start with a little bit of doom and gloom to lead into it, which is we've got a change in government on the national level, which is going to squeeze us on the immigration side. So that 175 TI or even the quick carpet and paints, the people aren't going to be there to do it, so it's not going to actually get you what $175 TI used to get. We got the materials. About 60% of all of the lumber in Canada comes in California comes from Canada. So if we have any fun embargoes going on up there, that's not going to be great for all of our material prices. And then the really scary thing, which is more like existential, is our insurance costs, because the way that insurance in California works is we've got the FAIR plan, which is, you know, kind of like the insurer of last resort. What a lot of people don't know is that what happens when the FAIR plan effectively goes bankrupt, which it probably will after the LA fires, is they're able to reach back into everyone else's insurance plans and claw back everyone else's premiums. So basically every other insurance program in the country, in the state, is the backstop for the FAIR plan, and so everybody's premiums go up because of that. Not
I
sure
remember
everybody
this from our
knew that
pre-call. We had our pre-call last week, and he was doom and gloom in the entire call. And I'm trying to get you to talk about the positive.
Yeah.
part.
So here are the positives. The positives are that what we've got is, as people have heard a lot about AI, but where the rubber meets the road is that the AI is actually getting good enough to the point where robotics for things like the build-outs, for things like painting, for things like drywall, stuff like that, is actually, for the first time, it's been promised for the last 50 years that it would be good enough. We're actually within spitting distance of this stuff being good enough, where the robots actually can be a meaningful, put the humans on steroids when it comes to things like pulling cables, putting the drywall up, painting it, all of those things. So what I do actually expect is for a lot of this build-out stuff, where we're going to see a massive crunch in labor, we're going to see a very nice sort of tailwind of technologies coming in to help those. From the materials point of view, there's once again been a long sort of push for quote-unquote more sustainable building materials, things like rice hay and hemp OSB, things like that, that were kind of like, okay, fine, why would I ever do this if I've got cheap lumber coming in from Canada? But if all of a sudden that's 60% more expensive, or God forbid, as happened in COVID, it went up 4,000%, all of a sudden, you see with COVID, that was a short-term shock. With this might actually be like a five-year problem, in which case there are a bunch of these other technologies that aren't actually breaking the laws of physics. They're what I would class as boring technologies that are actually out there, that we just have to ramp manufacturing on them. So it's a long way of saying, like, yes, in the short term, it is going to get very painful when it comes to hiring humans to do the work and buying the materials to do the work for those TIs. But the AI and the rest of the supply chain in the US actually is primed to be able to solve these, either because the AI is getting so much better for the robotics, or because we actually got pretty good at making some of these other things because of COVID.
Well, it's a great segue to the next topic, so to speak, the impact of AI and tech on the leasing market, and whether we should base a thesis of investing capital just on AI. Alexander's PowerPoint was forceful. That's leading the market. But if you would take that away, the net absorption is still just very small. So I want to start with you, Jim, in a sense. Do you think AI is a flash? Is it just a short-term thing, or is it really a longer-term growth that we can base a thesis of investing on?
I don't think it's a flash, but with the amount of vacancy that we have in the market, it's not a single source solution. Mm-hmm. Again, we went through basically 5 years of negative absorption. Finally, depending on who you believe, either 200 or 311,000 square feet of positive absorption for the first time in 5 years. I think we're going to come back and look 3 or 4 years from now and say Q3, Q4 of last year was where we hit rock bottom, both on pricing on the investment side and on the leasing side. 70% of all deals that we did this year in the market was 5,000 square feet and below. So what that tells us, and then I would say in Q4, 70% of all deals that were done in the Central Business District were Class A. Yeah. So there's still that bifurcation, that flight to quality that we're seeing. So with that, those 5,000 square foot deals, and historically in the last decade where tech, I'm just going to use tech generally, made up 50% of all deals done, they currently represent between 34 and 40% of tenants in the market, but they from expansion space this year, if we break it out, it was well over 50% of
Correct.
the deals done on the expansion side. So these
That's not sustainable.
no, it's not sustainable. But from a seed and A round standpoint, these 3,000 and 5,000 square foot users that was mentioned earlier will become 10, 15, 20,000 square foot users in the next 12 to 18 months. So it's a start, and it's going to help on certain product segments. And we get back to what the underlying issue is in this market is that the weight of our vacancy is in large block, both A and B will be slower to recover on that. So we're still down the road from seeing these type of firms maturing into sizes that are going to start filling some of those holes that have been created with downsizing and right sizing over the last 4 or 5 years.
I'd love it if Cyrus, Chris, and Stephanie could all comment on that, because clearly and Stephanie, you might be perfect to start because of your acquisition on California. Those are the tenants you're looking for.
Yeah, I would say that completely agree with Jim. I think it helps for sure. AI tenants are part of our leasing. It's not the main driver. Mostly it has been the traditional FIRE type of tenants, professional services, lawyers, real estate, and some technology. And so I think this is an important green shoot that I think helps I would say, image and PR of San Francisco. And don't get me wrong, it's still the capital of the world for AI, and so I think we shouldn't take it lightly, but I don't think it's going to save the day, but I think it is a helpful green shoot, and so far we're seeing benefits to our portfolio, but it's not the driver quite yet.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I'm hoping, though, that there's some sort of multiplier there that I don't see. It seems like in the past when we've had a downturn, we've always come out of it sooner than we expected. I remember when we developed 199 Fremont, we were going through all the assets. That was a parking lot at the time, and I was a junior at that point. We spent very little time on it because people were saying, oh, it's going to be, the senior guys are saying it's going to be 5 years before we can think about developing this thing. And it seemed like a year later or something like that, we were dusting it off and we delivered it in 2000. So, you don't see the downturn coming. And it seems like we always come out of it unexpectedly in a way. This seems like a much deeper hole that we're in than I've ever seen. So it's going to be a longer crawl out of it. But I do wonder how much of that 35% is, obsolete space that really isn't as much of a factor. Is there a real vacancy number out there that we're working off of? And maybe you have a point on that.
So a couple of things. I think just on the AI comment, I think the bigger impact, positive impact in our market is going to be the fact that AI has sort of promoted this expedited return to office. From a cultural perspective, these AI companies have established a 5-day-a-week sort of culture because of the pace of innovation and the fact that they have to be together to problem solve in order to keep up. They really view this as sort of an arms race, right? And DeepSeek and everything else and all the conversations you saw in the last 3-4 days, I think is indicative of the fact that we really are, and rightly or wrongly, it's now being framed as a true arms race against China. And so to win that, you have to be in the office. Now, the second order sort of impact, the benefit that the rest of us see as a result of that is that it now becomes okay to sort of have that conversation with your employees across industry. And San Francisco, I think, is going to lead the way in the same way that we led the way towards a dispersed workforce. We're leading the way back to return to office. Now, the numbers are going to be lagging. And a year from now, you're going to be like, wow, I really did win that bet. But I do think that we are seeing that today. And as a result of that, decision makers are actually moving from what leases were sitting on CFOs' desks are actually moving to execution at a much faster pace. So I think the stat was there's 1,200,000 plus foot leases last year, and we've already had 4 in January. I think that is indicative of just sort of the exponential change. So I think with AI, I would leave it at that, which is that even if all it does is change the mindset of other occupiers, that alone is a massive benefit. I think when you look at sort of this vacancy question and whether or not AI, as true AI, from an AI, in terms of your actual product, will fill 35 million feet, I have no idea and I doubt it. I mean, 35 million is a lot. And whether or not, look, we are supply constrained. Prop M is a factor here in San Francisco. And for as bad as a lot of that 35 million is, whether locationally or in terms of, ceiling heights and so on, replacing that due to all the things that you just touched on and all the unfortunate Byzantine issues we deal with permitting and approvals and so on in San Francisco, replacing that is a long ways away. And so I'm not sure that we're going to see that product refresh in terms of getting demolished and rebuilt at a large pace in short order.
Got it.
So it may just be that we see such tremendous tenant growth in demand, right? We're at about 8 million feet presently of tenants in the market. Our rolling average for 10 years is about 5.4 million, 5.5 million, give or take. And so we're already seeing positive absorption, even though it's only a couple hundred thousand feet.
Yeah.
But it's the start. And to your point, we're going to see exponential growth. So it may just be, and I'm bullish San Francisco. And I'm sure, if you've heard me speak about the city,
Everyone on the panel is the most bullish. So
it may just be that through lack of supply, you're going to end up seeing the mid-markets fill up inside, 5 years, but not by choice. It's just that rents elsewhere are going to be too high, and there's just no inventory elsewhere. And that's it. Again, if we had endless amounts of family office capital that was sort of able to go unlevered, we would buy up every single building that we could in well-located places, because I do think you're going to see that compression. And you're already seeing it in the top tier of the market, not just the trophy, but sort of the differentiated product. You're seeing rent growth, even though you've got 35% vacancy.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit of that waterfall effect, right? It's going to fill up and trickle down.
yeah, I think that goes nicely to your investment class, Chris, because the foreign, you're 100% foreign investors, and those people have a much longer term in their return and don't even base it on the same metrics that we base it on.
Yeah, we're cash flow driven. We look at IRR, but we're certainly not IRR driven. We're primarily German pension funds and insurance companies, bit of Korean capital, and then we have some Latin American capital as well, but primarily German. And yeah, they're cash flow driven, long-term driven. They see value here.
Yes.
They want brochure quality, core plus, and reliable, stable cash flow. And by the way, we've been active over the last little over a year. We're on our third acquisition, and we love the basis that we're buying these things at. But I can tell you, for the type of asset we're looking at, there are other buyers out there. It's amazing. The bid sheets are getting longer, and we were kind of hoping that we'd have a period of time that might be a little lonely on the bid sheet, but that's not proving to be the case.
Just let me look at Vlad. How are we doing on time? Okay, still okay? Great. I want to open it up for questions. I've got another round of questions for the panel, but is there anybody that would love to lob a question?
Yeah, here.
Go for it.
I guess you can't see us. So you're talking about structural vacancy and which gets filled. I don't think I've heard a conversation about converting vacant office to residential.
Got it.
Oh, it's expensive.
That's
Question
a pipe
is,
dream.
we have a lot of structural vacancy. Can we talk a little about the conversion concept? Jim, you want to pick it up?
I think you're going to have Gensler up here.
Oh, okay.
In the next panel, and they've done plenty of research on this, and they can speak to it much better than I think any of us can. But I know that there have been studies done. It may have been 300, 400 buildings that they've looked at and came up with 8, 10
Right.
that, from an economic standpoint, would make sense from a conversion basis. But I think they would be better served to answer that for you.
It's a pipe dream.
Right.
That too.
I would say I
Jim
concur.
was so nice to say that.
I'm a little embarrassed to see Gensler here, but then we did some deep analysis with Gensler on a couple of buildings that were probably very good candidates, and we're just like 30% off in costs. So I also believe it's a pipe dream in San Francisco, in California.
Yep.
Our construction costs are just way too high, and we don't have the regulatory environment to actually provide for the credits and incentives to offset. And even if we did, and you wiped transfer tax, you wiped impact fees, you wiped permit fees, we were looking at this for Market Center and for one of the towers, and your basis would be north of 800, almost 900,000 a door. It just, you can buy new product less than 10 years old today for somewhere between 300 to 400 a door. it doesn't make sense.
San Francisco is a high tax place to do business and high tax. Other cities, New York gives a lot of credits. Seattle's now giving credits. We're just not competitive in that area to do conversion.
Yet.
Yet.
I would say,
Well,
think
we have a new mayor.
Yeah, I think the new administration.
Well, but he's got $900 million deficit. We're not going to see that anytime soon. Anybody else with a question? Yes, sir.
I know you guys are talking about the AI sector and not.
Can you speak up a little bit?
You were talking about how AI, and you were saying about how that industry, you're not optimistic on it really bringing things back. Is that taking into account like the Stargate recent announcements of like $500 billion?
Yeah, the vast majority of the Stargate dollars are not going to touch the coasts or any big city. It's infrastructure data centers into like Ohio. So I wouldn't hold my breath for that impacting any of these markets at all.
I also wouldn't frame, at least what I was trying to say about AI was that I don't even want to speculate as to the direct impacts, but in terms of occupancy vis-a-vis the 35 million of vacancy today, I was simply saying that if there's only one thing that it does, it forces a sort of change in mindset on the return to office, that alone is going to have a profound impact on occupancy in a positive way. I do think there's direct sort of impact in terms of professional service firms and then other tech firms that need to be around as service providers or partners to AI companies that are also going to be driven by sort of what's happening. So there's no doubt this is a sea shift. This is a shift in terms of sort of the way what sort of version of technology we're in today and how that's going to impact real estate. It's just, is it going to fill 35 million feet directly or not?
No.
I personally, that's the piece I was caveating.
I just want to offer a perspective on transactions and what I've learned in the last few months on doing transactions. One is that landlords, building owners have to get to yes quicker. The old school, and we still have it, is that since it was a landlord's market, we can say no. And it's just not the case. If you don't make that deal soon, that tenant is going someplace else. And so getting to yes quicker, I have found, and experienced deal makers and lawyers should be able to get to yes. Number two is have the all hands meeting early on. And I mean have the construction team there. Have the construction team there, have the deal maker there, have the lawyer there, build that group from the beginning and the trust to get the deal done, because there are challenges on any of these deals today. But getting to yes faster and having that group all hands meeting and building the trust is important. And third, and maybe this is where I'd love everyone to comment, I am finding that if the more the land, especially with the AI companies, but other two tenants, the more I can assume the cost of construction and do a turnkey construction deal, the more successful I have in getting that deal done. Why don't we have everybody comment on that one?
Well, I'll maybe start. I find this very shocking that I'm like the VC on the panel. I'm super negative on AI in general as an industry. So what really worried me about Quinn's numbers is if you strip AI out of them, everything else is down. Like SaaS software investment, biotech investment, like everything else is down massively. And what we saw yesterday with this DeepSeek thing, and we can argue whether or not it's a real thing or not, we saw $2 trillion wiped out of the market in 24 hours, right? So this is very clearly a market that is on a knife's edge. And for us to feel like it's going to be the saving grace of the city when it could go away literally overnight, the same way we saw the internet go away in 1999 overnight, right? And yes, the internet still stuck around, but it took a good decade after that to come back. So I am extremely worried that we're over-indexing on this mirage of these AI companies are going to come. Yes, the dollars are there, but they can go away just as easily as they came, right? Easy come, easy go. And so I just wouldn't hold my breath for it.
Anybody else want to say something positive about getting deals done?
I would just posit to sort of provide the counterpoint to that, which is that I do think that a lot of companies have to slap AI in their name or in their mission just to get funding today because of the very issue you just touched on. And so in the same way that sort of every death during kind of 2020 and 21 was a COVID death, I think every company today is an AI company, even in their data. And so I think when you actually sift through what it is that a lot of these companies are doing, they may not be as directly negatively impacted by the hype in valuation and otherwise. Again, that may be my glasses.
We have overstayed our welcome. We're over out after time. I encourage everyone to meet the panelists and ask questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Hey, good meeting you. It was so nice meeting you. Yeah, please.